In a surprising turn of events, a recent unpublished United Nations report has revealed that there are no longer any active TIs between Al-Qaeda and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS, the group now leading Syria's interim government. This revelation could become a historic pivot point for Syria's future and an inflection point in global diplomacy. It has already begun to reshape U.S. policy in the Middle East and reignited debates within the UN Security Council. But how did we get here? And what does it mean for Syria, the United States, and major global powers like China and Russia? A decade of isolation. For more than a decade, Syria had been a pariah state. Under the leadership of Bashar al-Assad, the nation descended into a brutal civil war that attracted numerous extremist factions, including al-Qaeda affiliates and, later, ISIS. One of those factions was Jabhat al-Nusra, which later rebranded itself as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in 2016, officially cutting ties with al-Qaeda. Despite the name change, global powers remained unconvinced. Sanctions piled on. HTS and its top leaders, including Ahmed al-Shara, were placed under UN sanctions, which included travel bans, asset freezes, and weapons embargoes. But everything changed in December 2024, when HTS led a coalition that ousted the Assad regime in a swift and unexpected military offensive. Ahmed al-Shara became interim president, promising an inclusive and democratic future for the war-torn country. Now, with the fresh UN report suggesting that there are no current active links between HTS and Al-Qaeda, the world is forced to reconsider its stance. A policy shift from Washington, the United States, was the first to act. In May 2025, President Donald Trump announced a major shift in U.S. policy toward Syria, declaring that it was time to lift sanctions and support the rebuilding of the country. A month later, Trump signed an executive order officially revoking the U.S. designation of HTS as a foreign terrorist organization. Washington's rationale was clear: engagement was better than isolation. A peaceful, unified, and economically viable Syria, free from Iranian and Russian dominance, aligned with U.S. strategic interests. Removing HTS and President Shara from the list of sanctioned entities would also allow American businesses to participate in reconstruction efforts and stabilize the region, thereby reducing the necessity for further U.S. military presence. A spokesperson from the U.S. State Department confirmed, "We are reviewing all remaining designations related to HTS and Syria and considering adjustments to the UN sanctions list." The UN report, a Gameshangirdi confidential UN report, expected to be published later this month, covers a 6-month period ending in June 2025. It relies on assessments and intelligence from various UN member states. The central conclusion is striking: there are no active links between Al-Qaeda and HTS leadership, particularly President Shara and Interior Minister Anas Khattab. However, the report does caution that several HTS and aligned members, especially those in tactical roles or integrated into the new Syrian army, remained ideologically tied to Al-Qaeda. In other words, while the top leadership appears pragmatic and moderate, some lower-level operatives may still harbor extremist beliefs. This nuance is critical. It allows the international community, particularly the US, to justify a re-engagement with Syria while acknowledging the complexities still embedded in the transitional government. A U.S. bet on reconstruction and business. The Trump administration has framed this pivot as not only a strategic realignment, but also an economic opportunity. Trump advisors argue that lifting sanctions would catalyze foreign investment, allow for U.S. firms to take part in rebuilding Syria's infrastructure, and provide a counterweight to Chinese and Russian influence. Regional analysts agree, lifting the sanctions would inject much-needed capital into Syria's collapsed economy and reduce the appeal of radical groups filling the void, said one diplomat based in Amman. However, critics argue that the U.S. might be turning a blind eye to unresolved human rights issues and the murky past of HTS. They worry that political expediency is replacing long-standing principles. China and Russia push back. Not everyone is on board. Both Russia and China, two veto-wielding members of the UN Security Council, have voiced strong objections to lifting sanctions, particularly over the integration of foreign fighters into the Syrian army. During a Security Council meeting in June, China's ambassador to the UN, Fu Kong, expressed grave concern over these developments. The Syrian interim authorities should earnestly fulfill their counter-terrorism obligations, he said, specifically pointing to Uyghur fighters from China and Central Asia, members of the Turkestan Islamic Party TIP, as a serious threat. Beijing views the TIP as a terrorist organization responsible for fomenting separatism in Xinjiang. The presence of these fighters in Syria, and the Syrian government's plan to integrate them into the military, is a red line for China. Russia echoed these sentiments. Ambassador Vasily Nebenzia stated, "It is essential that Syria's army and police are staffed exclusively by professional personnel with untainted track records. That's diplomatic code for excluding irregulars, jihadists, and former militants. The concern is not without merit." The UN report notes that defections occurred among those who see Shara as a sellout, and warned that the interim president could even become a target of internal backlash. The potential for new insurgencies forming within the army itself is a real and present danger. Can the sanctions be lifted? Here lies the biggest question. Even if the United States removes HTS from its own terror list, lifting UN sanctions is a much heavier lift. The Security Council operates on consensus, and both China and Russia are likely to block any resolution that benefits a government harboring what they consider hostile actors. Diplomats involved in the negotiations say the US will have to offer serious concessions, possibly related to other UN resolutions, arms control, or regional power dynamics in Asia or Eastern Europe, to gain the support of Russia and China. Even then, the issue of the 5,000+ foreign fighters still active in Syria remains a deeply divisive point. Integrating them into the army may help stabilize Syria in the short term, but could plant the seeds for future insurgency or regional backlash. A new regional order? If sanctions are lifted, Syria could rapidly re-enter the international system. Humanitarian organizations are already preparing for large-scale aid delivery and infrastructure projects. European countries, especially those facing waves of Syrian refugees, would likely support reconstruction if it means a path to repatriation. There's also the strategic alignment to consider. A US-friendly Syria could limit Iran's influence in the region, isolate Hezbollah, and offer a counterbalance to Russian presence in the eastern Mediterranean. In the words of one European diplomat, this could be the beginning of a new regional order if it's handled correctly. But that, if carries tremendous weight, risks and uncertainties. The risks are manifold. A premature lifting of sanctions without ensuring real ideological transformation within HTS could backfire. Rogue elements within the army, foreign fighters with grudges, and opportunists seeking to exploit the vacuum of power could destabilize Syria once again. The United Nations itself is walking a tightrope. By publishing the report that may trigger a chain reaction of diplomatic and economic normalization, it risks being seen as enabling a former militant group. There's also the credibility of HTS and Shara's leadership. So far, they've said the right things. They've allowed UN monitors access. They've engaged with Western diplomats. But will these signals translate into real democratic reforms and a pluralistic Syria? The upcoming months may define Syria's future for decades. For the first time in years, there is a glimmer of hope, a fragile one for a nation long devastated by war and division. The UN report on HTS is not just a document, it is a political trigger. The United States sees an opportunity for peace, business, and influence. China and Russia see a risk to their interests and a potential breeding ground for terrorism. In the middle lies Syria, tentatively stepping out of the shadows, trying to shed the weight of its past and convince the world it deserves a second chance. Whether that second chance becomes reality or remains a footnote in diplomatic history will depend not only on Ahmed al-Shara and HTS, but on the world's willingness to take a calculated leap of faith.